Many thanks, Oyeyemi, for that background report. Now, joining us to discuss prospects of constitutional rule for traditional rulers is Professor Edoba Omorigi, a senior advocate of Nigeria, SEN. He is a professor of constitutional law and governance at the University of Benin. He's currently on national assignment with the National Institute for Legislative and Democratic Studies. Right here in Abuja, as the Director of Legislative Support Services. Many thanks for joining us for Good Morning Nigeria today.
Thank you so much, my sister. How are you?
All right, we also have joining us via Zoom, Professor Kabir Mato, Department of Political Science and International Relations, University of Abuja. And we are always glad to have you with us whenever we have conversations like this. Professor Mato, thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you. Good morning, Nigeria.
All right. Let me start with the learned Silk here in the studio. And I'm just wondering, first of all, the agitation for mainstreaming, the local traditional rulers into our constitution is becoming very popular. I mean, from the National Assembly, to I mean, the political leadership and everybody's calling for, recognition of the roles of the traditional rulers. And I'm wondering, is this a mere, is it popular with the people, or is it just a rave of the moment?
Oh, thank you very much. In your opening remark, you said it's become more popular. So I think it's quite frankly not debatable at all that our people, the Nigerian people, still relate very, very cordially with the traditional institution. And they play a lot of role anyway, even as we speak. All that is being sought for now is to use your language to mainstream the role in the constitutional framework of the country. It's only proper, as a matter of fact, because that has always been the case anyway. Until suddenly in 1999, under the current political dispensation, that the traditional rulers were removed completely from the constitutional framework. In other words, since we became independent, 1960 up until 1999, traditional rulers were fully mainstreamed, were fully part of the constitutional framework of the country. And then by 1999, for reasons that nobody can explain, because I've done quite a number of reviews on this, and there's nothing to show how did they come to that conclusion that this is the best thing to do, that is to remove traditional rulers entirely from the constitution. In virtually all the states, traditional rulers are already part of the governance structure, even by way of statutory provisions. Virtually all states in the country have one statute or the other, declaring roles for traditional rulers. So it's a very narrow point that we are raising now, which is put them in the constitution. As we have already recognized them in the entire governance architecture, simply just include them also in the constitution. That's all.
But the local government reforms before the 1999 constitution did not also recognize, the role of the lolocal government.
Actually, it did. It depends on the kind of role we are talking about, really.
Exactly.
Obviously, if it's so that they will now begin to exercise executive power, I'm sure many persons would question that. Okay. Because of the fact that may be regarded as anti-democratic. Because we have decided to become a democratic nation. And of course, that traditional rulers are not elected, so to say. Though in some cultural setting, you have to also elect them. But of course, you have to elected through ruling houses. That is not the same thing as having the entire country or community or constituency electing traditional rulers. So I think that if we are talking of executive role for them, or even legislative role, many persons would, perhaps stand up against that. But in terms of other things that the country cherish, cultural values, for instance, even security matters. Traditional rulers play a role, even now, And so they need to be formally recognized for reason of, ensuring that the country's governance architecture is strengthened.
All right, Professor
So that's
Omoyege,
basically the idea.
would pause you at this point. Of course, we'll get back to you, to get your insight on this particular issue. Let's quickly get to Professor Mato now. Agreed, at the moment, there's no constitutional role for traditional rulers. But, I mean, before now, traditional rulers were very much respected and powerful leaders in our communities. These days, we see them being pushed aside, talked down on. I mean, all kinds of things being done to traditional rulers. Could you tell us what went wrong, how, and why?
Well, thank you very much. Once again, good morning, Nigeria. I think the debate has been, taking place for a very long time. The institution of traditional rulers, as far as the history of this country is concerned, is deeply rooted. Rooted in the sense that before the advent of colonial rule, most Nigerian societies were actually under the rulership of these traditional institutions. Now, the introduction of colonial rule itself was facilitated and made a lot easier in substantial Nigeria by, ruling through the traditional institutions, and that's what the British normally refer to as the indirect rule system. In substantial northern Nigeria, in southwestern Nigeria, in some parts of the South, like Benin Kingdom, and a few other places, deeply rooted traditional system of governance in place. But the introduction of, the so-called Western liberal contraption of democracy within our culture has substantially the role that this is playing, and that virtually casual employees of state and play fundamental roles only where political state, this to get across to the people at very difficult moments in our historical existence. For instance, during times of crisis and so on and so forth, you find, the state government, the federal governments working towards, the traditional institution in order to cause substantial, return to peace within our communities. Now, that being what it is, the role of the traditional institution under the democratic dispensation, in my view, cannot be specifically spelled out in the Constitution, as it is likely to endanger the institution much more than, bring succor to it. And many reasons are responsible for that. Number one is that as a federation, Nigeria has not been able to deploy, and this is, all intent and purposes, the meaning of true federalism. We have not been able to imbibe the ethics and the ethos of what a federal structure should be like. I give you an example. In the First Republic and during colonial rule, the 3 regions and later 4 regions that we had in this country are basically 2 levels. The central regional governments, and then that's a constitution, and then the regional governments also have their constitutions. And the constitutions of the regional governments provided very clearly ways and means of local administration within the particular regions, 3 and later 4 in this country. Now, in northern Nigeria, for instance, what we had was a native authority system. And the native authority systems were built strongly or specifically on the strength of the traditional institution and their capacity to manage the affairs of their people. So it became a hybrid of both Western and traditional system of governance. But the military intervention in 1967, going forward, we got back to civil rule in 1979, and subsequently in 1999, did not, and of course, before that, you clearly rightly mentioned, there was the local government reforms in 1975, 1976, 77, commonly referred to as the Suki local government reform, that actually redefined the role of the traditional institution within the local government or within the new framework of the local government system. Now, if we want constitutional role for traditional institution in this country, I think the best way to go is, of course, to examine the nature and character of our federal structure. Like I said, as a professor of political science, I do know very well that most federal systems across the globe actually operate on the basis of two federating units. There are two federating units. You can have as multiple as possible, levels of government. But these levels of government are created on the basis of the specifications and peculiarities of each of the communities or each of the political, entities that comprise of what you call Nigeria. Now, if you don't do that, then you continue to create a lot of crises. Let me give you another example. For instance, you may need a local government system in Edo State, in Kaduna State, in Plateau State, that may be different from the local government system that you may have in Oyo, in Ogun, in Osun, in Anambra, in Enugu, in Kano, in Zamfara, and so on and so forth. Because these are mostly societies that are on one hand heterogeneous and on another hand, they are very homogeneous. So the local system of administration, therefore, in these places must not be the same. And one of the beautiful things I found about the national conference that organized by, former President Goodluck Jonathan, and one of its recommendations was the delisting, of the entire local government systems from the schedule of the Nigerian Constitution, and instead allowing states, 36 as they exist at the moment, have their own constitutions. But of course, the constitution of any, federating unit must not conflict in any way.
Professor Mato, thank you. Thank you, and I'm very glad you raised the issue of native authority system, and you also belong to the other group, of course, who believe that we must be cautious, of course, when clamoring for a constitutional rule for the traditional rulers. Again, indeed, before our independence, before the coming of the colonialists, the traditional rulers, wielded immense authority. Of course, they administered, governance at their regional or local levels until when the colonialists came, utilized, of course, their influence, and then started the native authority system by the side of indirect rule. Again, by the local government ordinance of the 1950s, it whittled down the influence of the traditional rulers, and it went on to the military, regime in 1966 and all that. And so, I'm just wondering, what specific roles are we talking about for the traditional rulers? The situations are different. Before now, the security dynamics that they solved or they superintended, was quite different. It's not your regular security issue now. Technology has changed everything. So I'm just coming back to the learned's sake here. What are the specific roles? Can we define these roles that we are talking about? Because the traditional rulers still, like you rightly said, carry out those functions that we are asking to be enshrined in the Constitution.
Yeah, I think we have to be very careful not to overwhelm the people with our own narrow and individual thinking. When you talk of a constitution, it's the reflection of the will of the people. So if the people desire that the traditional rulers should be mainstreamed in their governance system, who are we to object to it? So the constitution
it's not who are we.
No.
We are looking at the intricacies and complexities of doing that under a federal system.
I just thought to put that context. I'm a federalist myself, and so I understand that there is nothing, in the federal system that says that the traditional rulers cannot play a role. Absolutely nothing. As a matter of fact, traditional rulers are the embodiment of federalism. What does that mean? It means that federalism is a bottom-up kind of system, and if you exclude traditional rulers, you are basically trumping federalism. Which is that before you say this is the government of the people, you have to look at the entire ramification of how their ways of life. How do they live? How do they want to live? How do they want to exist? I'm from Benin, for instance. I have tremendous respect for my Oba, and it's basically like a living god to the average Benin. And if you exclude him, the entire institution from the governance architecture, as we have done, we have basically undermined the people, and that is undermining federalism. So I'm not saying that you should restore what has passed, which is, as the Oba of Benin, for instance, to become a monarch in the sense of being a constitutional monarch. No, that's not what we are proposing. What I think should go forward, and that is what many people are suggesting, is that in the way that's always been, which is find a way, define something, no matter how tangential, which suggests that the people have been recognized, their ways, their morals recognized. Let me just give you a practical example. In 1979, for instance, the military, after they had gone through the Constitutional Conference, put a position there in the Constitution to say that presidential rulers shall play advisory role to the state government. It didn't stop there. It says that all the chairmen, traditional heads of of all the states, those who are recognized as the first-class chief, are also members of the Council of State. It's there in the Constitution. Which is, what does the Council of State do? Advise the president. Nothing more. And so the whole idea
is this still in the Constitution?
Of course, in 79 it was there.
Okay.
In 89,
in 1999,
it was removed.
It was removed.
So that is where, and then who brought the 1999? We all know that many constitutional law experts have said that the 1999 is autonomous. That is, it did not come from the people.
So is this what we are asking? Is this what you're asking to be?
If you ask me as an individual, I would desire that we have the kind of role, an advisory role for traditional rulers. So that the sort of disrespect, as my sister has mentioned, you end. Imagine a situation where a governor will wake up and say, depose the traditional ruler. If you do a consensus of the people, or a sense of the people, is that what they desire? So that's politicization of the traditional institution, and that is wrong. So, but if you put them, recognize them basically as, in an institution that cannot be undermined, destroyed, as we have done with all other institutions of state, for instance, the legislative branch, the judicial branch, and even the executive branch. Somebody can wake up and say, okay, I have abolished the judiciary, for instance, or I have removed the CJ without following the constitutional process. So that's what we're talking about, so that our people, the people, will feel part of government. Because you can imagine the trauma that many persons will feel. In Kano, for instance, you hear that, the emir of Kano has been deposed, whether rightly or wrongly. Is that what the people really desire? And so on. So we have to be very careful. I'm not saying that we should return back to pre-colonial life. No, that is not what happened. We have already accepted democracy. But look at the United Kingdom, for instance. The United Kingdom is one of the most celebrated democracies in the world, even now. And yet, the British monarchy, exists side by side. There's no conflict at all. So you need to be very clear. Nobody is saying that you should have...
I like that. You have made that clarification.
Basically, that's the point.
We are not asking that, the traditional rulers return to...
that is not...
So you are asking for an advisory role immersed in the Constitution.
That is what was the case for many years. Until 1999, went from nowhere.
It was
expunged from the Constitution.
It was expunged. By who?
Now, Professor Morige, some people who are against, the inclusion, or rather giving traditional rulers constitutional roles, is the politicization of traditional institution which you mentioned. Some say that by the time you include them and then probably make their roles more elaborate, these traditional rulers...
I will not support any form of elaborate rule for traditional rulers in the Constitution. Absolutely not. It's not necessary. As we speak now, traditional rulers know their place in society. Nobody is, doubting their role in society. Whether you may put them in constitution or not, actually, the people will still relate with them the way they are relating with them. But in order to ensure that our cultural, values are not undermined, as well, you see, any people who undermine their cultural values have lost their identity. Why do we celebrate the British today? One of the biggest reasons why the British United Kingdom remains a major country in the world today is because of the value that it accords to its traditional institution, which, if you go to Buckingham Palace now, you see a crowd of people going just to see. If you go to Rome, you see all the vestiges of the Roman Empire.
Now, talking about these cultural values, Professor Morige, I was trying to talk about, the display by these traditional rulers as being what is responsible for what we see today. Yes, because, for example, you talked about our cultural values. I know that in certain kingdoms, the ruler, the Oba, or the king doesn't leave his palace to go see one governor or somebody contesting for something and all of that. You are on your throne. You know your place as a traditional ruler. And of course, that's where the respect and, the power that they wielded in the past came from. But these days, we see traditional rulers, hobnobbing with politicians, going to government houses and all of that. Now, including them in giving them a constitutional role now, would that not make this a lot messier?
Let me say this, just my own personal impression. I believe that some of those traditional rulers who engage in such things, it's because they themselves have been left in a lurch, more or less. They don't see themselves playing any significant role in government. That's why they are trying to make themselves relevant, as it were. But if you clearly define that your role is to advise government, and you identify as was done in the 1960 Constitution, very clearly, even though they went further to put them in the parliament and so on, I don't support that. Then in the 1979 Constitution, which is closest to what we are talking about, say your role is to advise government on security, for instance, advise government on cultural issues, or any other role that the governor may request you to advise on. That's enough.
Okay.
You don't have to go too far to say, you now, and all those necessary things.
All right.
Traditional law, sorry, just to make this final point. Yeah. Customary law, for instance, is basically recognized as the mirror of accepted usage. In other words, it doesn't have to be written before it is accepted by the people. In the same vein, traditional rulers don't have to go being elaborately indicated in the Constitution, before they become, more relevant for the sake of governance. Just enough to recognize you cannot be deposed, for instance, without following due process and so on and so forth. That's enough. Not that you wake up, you hear on the news that whoever has been deposed, and that is not what the people want. It can cause a lot of crisis. Look at what had to happen in Kano, where they had to deploy soldiers and the rest of them. If you had, a clearly indicated role for them, the governor of the state will be careful to do that. Whether when it was first done or when it was subsequently done, all these things are avoidable.
Okay, Professor Omorege, thank you. Let me bring in Professor Mato. Professor Mato, you heard Professor Deba Omorege here. Of course, he is advocating advisory rule, a return of that clause that conferred advisory responsibility on the traditional rulers. And I'm wondering, is that what the traditional rulers really want? Because even in the past, when that was still within the Constitution, the security of their office was very fragile. I mean, a local government chairman was at liberty to either take the advice or leave it. Same as the chief executive or even the president. And in one of their reasons, a high-ranking member of the National Assembly did say that what they want in the Constitution for traditional rulers is to secure the office of the traditional rulers. What do you have to say about that?
Well, thank you very much. Let me start from the point of view that the Constitution, if the insertion or the assignment of any role or responsibility of the traditional institution in the Constitution does not necessarily guarantee the safety and the existence of a particular traditional ruler. I hope we remember that in every state where you have traditional institutions, there are in existence laws that have to do with the appointment and depositions of chiefs, emirs, kings, and whatever you call them. This is politics. We're not talking about legalism here. We're talking about pure political issues. And I'm saying, I'm not, against the idea of, finding roles for traditional institutions, but we cannot find roles for traditional institutions outside of what they are doing now in the present composition of the structure of the Nigerian federal system. And that's the basis of my argument. It's still possible Now, what role are you trying to assign for the traditional institution? Is it a judicial? Is it an executive, or is it a legislative role? And I've been an advisor, for instance, to a state government, and I'm still serving as an advisor on honorary capacity. I know what extent an advisor can go. I know what he can do. I know to some extent what he cannot do. What I'm saying, in essence, is that yes, the traditional institution is very critical in the provision of modern governance, even in our society. But then the problem is that we need to restructure our political system in order to be able to contend with that. And what do I mean by that? I mean that the system of federation that we are operating is lopsided. And when you talk about restructuring, when you talk about true federalism, I'm saying these are the major items of the agenda that should form the foundation of having a true federal system, not just mentioning by the fact that the Constitution simply mentions traditional ruler or traditional institution in it, does not confer any extra powers or responsibility, to the party. Just like Professor Moregi himself is saying, he is averse to the fact that he does not want a lot of roles to be assigned to the traditional institution. Now, whether we like it or not, the traditional institution plays a very critical role in the smooth operation of our society. But the Constitution has not recognized that, and it cannot recognize that under the present arrangement that we have, unless we tinker with it to create, a more sovereign, relatively sovereign subnationals, the state to be able to come up with ways and means of conducting their local administrative. So I've been part of the Constitution Review consultancy team in the National Assembly from 2003 until very recently. And I know this is an item that kept featuring every time the Constitution was to be amended. And the confusion at the end of the day, with a lot of professors of law like Omorige, senior advocates of Nigeria, and so on and so forth, but at the end of the day, the matter gets to the dead end to the extent that you realize that by the time you insert certain rules, you even create more dangers for the traditional, institutions. So it is better to play safe, allow them the way they are until such a time when we realize that our local content of administration is also desirable within the modern context of governance that we are operating in Nigeria. And then we amend the Constitution to create more efficient rules for the traditional institutions. When you insert traditional rulers or traditional systems in the Constitution, it does not mean that the governor does not have the liberty to depose any traditional, ruler, as long as, and after all, the issue of due process, in my humble opinion, is very relative. It's relative to the sense that what are the issues at stake and who are the individuals that are involved in it. So I will prefer that the traditional institution is insulated from unnecessary political bickering by remaining the way it is until such a time when Nigeria realizes the fact that it is urgent that we have to also do some hybrid between the Western liberal conception of democracy that we have and our traditional system of governance, that we can now be able to carry this institution on board so as to be able to give them sufficient rules, sufficient powers, and also be able to protect them. But the way it is now, I think it's just a matter of romanticization and people, just saying what they want to say, because everybody has a right to say what he or she wants to say.
You made a point that including them in the in the Constitution could make the traditional institution a bit dangerous, or create more problems. No, I just a minute. How would you handle the issue of class? When you assign roles, because we know that for traditional rulers and different places in this country, there's class to this thing. Like what happened in Edo State recently, where chiefs had the courage to take the Oba to the court. So now, if you give them this constitutional role, would there not be issues even within traditional institution?
See, we're just getting unnecessarily worried over, what is already established. Traditional rulers are not just a recent thing. Like I said, what is custom? Custom is the mirror of accepted usage. What people desire, that's what custom is. You can't force custom on anybody. So basically, the point is very narrow. It's not really a difficult point, which is that what do the people want? And I'm saying that the people, I've always wanted to continue to embrace their traditional institution. Essentially, all of us here, as we have one cultural, background or the other, and we are stronger, closer to those cultural backgrounds than even our, imported or British style system. That's the truth. And so when you form a government and you ignore what constitutes your culture, you are not going to have the sort of acceptance that you would expect. So I would think that we should restore what the people had embraced from the beginning, which is from 1960 till about 1999, which is that traditional rulers had to play advisory role. And to add to what Bana was talking about, and this is really the main point, because already the role, advisory role is there, so to say, just to put it in the constitution. They also should be insulated from politics.
That I was going to ask him how.
And this is how.
Yes.
This is how. The fact that a governor, I resent that, a governor who's been elected to go and govern, he takes his eye off the ball and begins to bother about traditional institutions. Traditional institutions are on their own, they are playing their role. There is a defined way by which they emerged. It is not through any election, it's not through government. The governor did not put the traditional law there. It's the people, through their cultural morals, that brought the traditional law back. Why should the governor go and depose a chief or traditional law that he did not bring about?
Does that because you said, sorry, Leonard,
yes.
I'm sorry, because you said earlier on that we are just probably making a mountain,
Sure, so the better point
out of a molehill or making a
yes, the main thing, therefore.
Just a moment.
Yes.
So I'm just wondering, what do you now make of, like we said, the current tussle that's going on, between, the two emirs and
there's no tussle.
No. There is. You find where the governor, is exercising, his executive powers over the traditionals too.
You see, politicians have a way of trying to, manipulate systems. That's the truth. Traditional rulers should be insulated from politics. And many of them are at the behest now of political class because they are not in the constitution. If you have a clear provision in the constitution that you cannot interfere with the traditional institution, for instance, they will stay away. But because it's not there now, that's why they are using, because the politicians are the one that make the law, if you don't know. They are the one that pass laws in the National Assembly. They are the one that pass laws in the State House of Assembly. But the people pass the constitution. You see the difference? So if the people in their constitution say, we want our traditional institutions to be protected, it will be so. But if you leave it as it has been done now at the level of statute, politicians will play, poker with them. That's what's going on. So I'm a constitutional law expert.
Yes.
Madam, let me just make
yes,
this final point.
I'm still not getting the idea of how we can guarantee, security for the position of traditional rulers when eventually they are mainstreamed into the constitution as,
That's, you see,
yes.
If you allow me, I've just told you.
Yes.
Currently, traditional rulers advise government, advise people, and people come to them. Now, the additional thing that one expects is now to put a clause, just not more than 2 or 3 clauses, to say that as is done in South Africa, if you look at the South African constitution, you find it there, that the system of traditional institution, is preserved, for instance. Because you can wake up one day, a governor or political fellow who feels that, I want to have my way.
Chairman.
Yes, and then abolish the entire institution. It can be done. And is that what the people want? This is a man who has only 4 years or 8 years to be there. He would have succeeded in undermining the entire people. Because you have to take a census of what do the people want. Most politicians don't do that. How many times do parliamentarians engage the public in passing laws? You know that. And how many persons do they really engage in passing laws? Just a number of persons that can attend to public hearings. But the entire people are out there. Sometimes when the laws come out, they don't even know how the law came about.
So please, what is this clause again you are talking about?
Basically, very narrow.
Yes.
I'm a drafter. If I'm asked to draft a clause in the constitution to say traditional laws are protected from the influence of politicians. The system, just like you have it, the system of local government administration by democratically elected functionaries is hereby preserved. Section 7.1 of the Constitution. That is what preserves local governance by democratic means. If you have the same clause there, then governors and the rest of them will be careful going to interfere with traditional institutions. But what they do now is that because there's no such provision in the Constitution, they can wake up and do anything they like.
Who now confers the staff of office on the traditional?
No, that's it's just like you are having the King of England the other day. The king, you don't know that, but the moment Charles became king, after all the, the cultural and the ceremonial things that were done, the prime minister had to give him a letter confirming that you are the king of England.
That's the monarchical system.
Yes, that's customary. That's basic, because over 300 or 400 years ago, the people defeated, the British monarchy, and they insisted that they want to have a government that they elect in the House of Commons. That's why you have the prime minister now, who is the head of the government of England. Nobody questions that. But the King of England continues to play his role as a cultural, a symbol of the British people. That is what we are talking about. I will never support a institution where the traditional ruler will not sit and be dispensing executive power. Or be dispensing legislative power, or be exercising judicial authority. Of course, that will be completely against what the people desire, which is they want to be governed democratically. But even as we are governing democratically, the culture of the people must be preserved. And the best way to do that is to ensure that the traditional institution is preserved as well. And the only way you can guarantee that preservation is by including them clearly in the constitution that the people have donated to themselves. Not the statute that ordinary folks, politicians make as they are doing it now.
Professor Mato.
So that's the distinction.
Okay.
Very clear.
Thank you so much, Professor Omarige. Professor Mato, I'd like to get back to you. And, from all your comments so far, you don't think that there's need for this constitutional role because, in your own words, they're already playing the role they should play as the traditional rulers. But you also made a point about it could be dangerous for a traditional institution, which I tried to point out to Professor Omarige. And he says no. But could you let us know, what the likely consequence of including the traditional institution in the Constitution, going forward?
Well, let me start by saying, with all due respect, Professor Omarige is just a professor of law, and professors of law are too restricting, in the management of the society or within the democratic enterprise as a whole. It is dangerous, to have the fact that you mentioned traditional institution in the Constitution does not insulate them from all the vagaries of, politicians that they are facing at the moment. The Constitution clearly defines, how a president, how a vice president, how a governor, how a governor, in case of default, are to be sanctioned by the National Assembly. So even the traditional institution, insertion in the Constitution does not mean that they are completely insulated, from any disciplinary or social activities that may be deemed necessary by the political authorities that are placed on top of that. I think the traditional institution is more honorable the way it is now, unless, of course, the role of the traditional institution should not be reduced to the level of mere advisory. In a lot of societies, in my society, the traditional institutions play a lot of judicial functions. They intercede. The lawyers there are telling us about alternative conflict resolution. How do we decongest the courts? In our communities, traditional institution is heavily involved in the resolution of a lot of matters that would have otherwise gone to the court of law and, taking a very long time before it is determined. So, the traditional institution, as far as I'm concerned, is a very critical institution. It played a role in modern governance, like, rightly mentioned, during colonial period, in the First Republic, and at a point in time, these functions were gradually denuded. That's a fact. How do we bring it back? We can only bring it back if we restructure our grand norm, and that is the Constitution, to allow them play certain roles with checks and balances. Now, recently, for instance, in the first 1960 until the end of military rule, a lot of complaints from various segments of our society tended to suggest that there was overbearing, maladministration on the part of a lot of the traditional rulers. They're also human beings. So I am saying that it is possible to have proper role for traditional institution, but on the condition that the Nigerian constitution will be amended to allow the levels of government determine functions and responsibilities and the nature of that. Because in Nigeria, when you talk about tradition, you talk about something that seems homogeneous. It's not. There are different traditions, there are different cultures, and the respect for traditional institutions also differ greatly. For instance, if you take the southeastern part of this country, where the colonial system had to create traditional institutions in order for it to have the implementation of colonial policies, but with a lot of difficulties. It wasn't the case with northern Nigeria. It wasn't the case with southwestern Nigeria. It wasn't even the case with Benin Kingdom, where Professor Oborogi comes from. So I am saying that the mere mention of the institution in the constitution will not insulate them from whatever disciplinary measures or actions that they are about to be taken. Even those that are mentioned in the constitution, are not insulated from that. So we need to think deeper. We need to take these things more seriously so that we will identify the actual roles that they are supposed to play in our contemporary governance realities and then bring them on board so that they can. But the mention in the constitution does not, in my view, confer any more respectability. In fact, they are more respected now. Once you insert them in the constitution, then you make them political tools in the hands of not only governors, but even local government chairmen. So let's return them the way they are now until such a time when we are agreed on the best way to be able to accommodate, and bring more roles to the traditional institutions, as we have seen them play critical roles in the management of peace and stability in the Nigerian society over a very long period of time.
I think that you may need to also clarify some of your contributions. You're not comfortable with the advisory disposition for the traditional rulers. So for you, you think we should retain them the way they are until such a time, an indefinite time, perhaps, when maybe the country is ready to now begin to contemplate, some more responsive positions for them. But again, like I said, indefinite time. But the traditional rulers themselves at the moment are saying, look, we want to be enshrined back to where we belonged. Back to where we belong. We want that advisory role. They're asking for that advisory role. So I'm wondering if, at the moment they are mainly ceremonial. They're not doing, what they ought to do. And the reason for the clamor of Nigerians that they be given more responsive roles. So what do you think, or how do you think, or what do you think, can be done? Because indefinite time, it doesn't solve our problems. We have a lot of insecurity issues. We have a lot of underdevelopment at the grassroots. We have a lot of communal issues that the traditional rulers, ab initio used to solve. So what can we do in the short run?
At the moment, play advisory role. And that's a role that they've always been playing. Now, I remember the last time the constitution was being amended. The proposal was that there should be the establishment of the National Council of Traditional Rulers, just like you have the National Council of State, and the role of that will that there should also be the establishment of state councils of traditional rulers. That's like we do have, councils of emirs and chiefs in many parts of this country. So their roles are already defined, by the Shia Convention of governance. They are already advisors, to the government at various levels, both at the local. I'm not saying the tinkering of the constitution and reassignment of rules, and functions and responsibilities among the critical sectors of the Nigerian society should wait forever. I mean, what I'm saying is that it should preoccupy at the moment. What we need to do now is to insist that there is a need to allow states operate their own constitutions and make provisions the best way to conduct local administration based on the characteristics and activities of federating unit or each state of the federation. But this universal application of role of traditional rulers, insertion in the constitution, in my view, will not play any positive role. Rather, it is only going to create, a symbol that in reality does not add up, to improving the well-being of Nigerians, to improving good governance, to improving even the capacity to advise those that they should advise that are in charge of, the allocation of our resources as a nation. So I'm not saying that we should wait. This is the discussion that, in my view, should be brought to the fore so that we can, as soon as possible, the National Assembly is in the process of amending Constitution, for God's sake. It took less than 24 hours, as far as I know, to change the national anthem from, the one that was in existence to the one before it. So the National Assembly can simply ask for views and opinions on what rules, and then allow specific roles, that the traditional institution will perform in the Constitution in their particular, areas of suzerainty.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Mato. Because of time, we need to move to the second leg of our conversation this morning. But Professor Morigi, I'd like you to, speak about what more needs to be done, whether on the part of the traditional rulers or on the part of the people or government. Because, some have said, well, like Professor Mato is saying, is the Constitution just enough to return the traditional rulers to their pride of place? Because a lot of things have gone wrong as far as that institution is concerned. So outside the Constitution, what else do you think would help return the respect and the power that traditional rulers used to have?
Now, let me correct an impression which my brother, professor, made. I'm a professor like himself, and I have a lot of respect for political scientists. Scientists generally, because they rely on empirical tools. And if he cares to know, if he goes back, he will discover that the preponderance of empirical view says that the people desire a role for traditional rulers in the Constitution. It's not my saying so. That's the empirical view. And that is all that matters, really. It's not our individual, it's not even my own individual impression. What do the people desire? The Constitution, if you look at the preamble, we, the Nigerian people. So if the Nigerian people desire that their traditional morals should be preserved through putting their traditional laws in the Constitution to play a role, advisory role, for instance, so be it. You see, we are talking of low voter turnout, for instance. We are talking of all kinds of distance from democratic process. I assure you that as the founders, of the Constitution, the founders of this country, 1960, Awolowo was, the Azikiwes, and the rest of them, the impression they had is that if you want to connect with the people, the closest way to do so is to relate with their traditional institution. That's why you see politicians, even now, before they go and seek election, they go and pay homage to traditional rulers. And a responsible traditional ruler will not support anybody because rather he will pray for all. That's what normally happens. I'm just to conclude.
We have less than 60 seconds, but I just like for you quickly. Now that the 1999 Constitution as amended,
yes,
does not have a place for our traditional rulers. It makes it very very delicate. So how do we begin to take this step from your perspective?
I'm happy that the National Assembly, let's be more practical now.
Yes.
I'm happy that the National Assembly has recognized this call. And that's why the House of Reps, in its call for proposal or memoranda, it included as part of the cause the role for traditional rulers. Before they decide to do that, they know that they have done their reviews and they have discovered that many people desire, just like they want, for instance, state police. It's still in flux, still in debate. They also put it there, role for traditional rulers. So a lot of persons I'm aware have already submitted memoranda to say that this is the kind of role that traditional ruler can play. Speaking as Professor Edoba Morigi, I will support a role that is advisory, no more than that, so that is what the people desire. For my own reviews, it's not what I desire, but what the people desire. And that role should be as narrow as possible. And then preserve them there, also in the Constitution, so that politicians will not play poker with them as they are currently doing.
All
right, thank you so much, Professor Edoba Morigi, Senior Advocate of Nigeria ASEAN and Professor of Constitutional Law and Governance at the University of Benin. Thank you so much for being a part of the conversation this morning.
Thank you so much.
We do appreciate Professor Kabir Mato, from the Department of Political Science and International Relations, University of Abuja. Thank you so much, Professor Mato, for your insight on the program this morning.
Thank you very much.
All right, we'll take a break. When we come back, we get into our second conversation, which is on Human Capital Development Index.